Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, and this is the EVE Universe Show's continued coverage of the CSM 16 election with our interviews, this time with Lucrative Business Opportunity. LBO. Can I call you LBO? How you doing?
I'm not too bad. You can call me LBO or Lucrative. Lucrative tends to be the common name that people like to call me by.
Lucrative. Okay. Well, I think I like LBO, but we'll see what
No,
happens. We'll see what
whatever
happens.
you feel comfortable with.
You just want to make people feel comfortable.
Of course, let their guard down a bit, and then we can take it from there.
Oh boy. Well, before I let my guard down, I should probably explain the rules. I have 50 minutes to explore the candidacy with the candidate. I have their post in front of me, which I can show, or which I will be showing you guys as we talk. My job is to try to find why people might be voting for them, what their angle is, and help frame their candidacy in kind of the most maybe not in the most favorable light, but like in the best way I possibly can. After that, I give them a 10-minute warning for them to bring up any that I may have missed or hit on a point that they feel is particularly important or give any last-minute presentations. And then when they are done, then I ship it all over to YouTube where it goes into the playlist for you to watch with all of the others in order to become informed, because that's what this is all about, making an informed electorate so we can have as effective of a CSM as possible, because it is a powerful tool for us as a players, and it is only what we make out of it. So let's make it better together. Let's begin, Lucrative, by asking, how would you make the CSM better?
So, one thing I can definitely start off with is that I'm definitely not part of a massive power block. And we all know that the massive power blocks, they can just generate the sheer number of votes to get in any candidate they really see fit to any significance. So I'm here on a smaller platform, a platform with smaller everyday changes that I think would benefit the wider community. Nothing to do with massive sovereignty changes, but other everyday gameplay changes. Because at the end of the day, most people are not 24/7 engaging in alliance versus alliance content. They're doing their anomalies, they're engaging in certain activities, and I think a lot of that, in certain respects, if it's improved a little bit, can just improve the life and the health of the game.
Well, I definitely agree with that. But so I guess before we dig in too deep into this, this is true about a few candidates, your name, Lucrative Business Opportunity, when people see it, a lot of people think it's a joke. I think even Elise first said something along those lines when he announced your candidacy. People don't want to throw away their vote to a joke, right? Like, so help me understand, who is Lucrative Business Opportunity, and are you a serious candidate, or is this a thing that was just made to stand out? What is your origin of your name in particular?
So I will start off on an honest note in that lucrative business opportunity, which I have to add is just a spectacular name,
It is
was
true.
definitely created, which was definitely created as on a human note. It was a joke character to begin with. At some point, I came across one of Marquis Dragon's streams, and at some point, the
That's a
discussion
good Freudian
turned on
slip,
this.
by the way. Go on.
No, yeah. Anyway, so he at some point, I think he talked about a Nigerian scam or something like that, and it
Hmm.
just occurred to me. Let me create a good name, and I'll send Marquis Dragon one of those fun emails, claiming to be some long distant Amarian, throne right person, and if only I had a little bit of ISK, I could gain that right, and massive returns, that kind of thing. I sent him a few joke messages, which he loved. And if you ever go into one of his streams, do the exclamation mark space prince, and that was created in my honor, and I think it's still going to this day. But apart from that, after about a month or two of just having a bit of fun with Lucrative, he actually did morph into a dedicated character of mine. Market, hauling, and a few other things. And he became a legitimate character. He definitely started off as a joke, which, I won't lie. And the name doesn't help, but the name is spectacular, I have to add again. And now he is actually an official character. The first CSM I ran for, which I think was CSM 14, that one was, I admit, much, much more jokey than this time. And this time I actually came up with some very legitimate points and some legitimate changes, which I think would improve the health of the game dramatically. And this is not alliance, massive sovereignty versus sovereignty changes I want implemented. It's little things to keep the everyday person around and to keep the game around. No, none of us want this game to die, and none of us wanted to go into a stale, stagnant state where no one enjoys logging in. Because at the end of the day, you need a reason to log in, and if you're having fun, the game isn't frustrating, people will continue to log in, and that's what I'm after.
I agree. I often ask, like, but what if the game was just legitimately fun, right? Like when people complain about PvE, it's like, but what if we actually like believed that there could be a PvE that was fun in its own right, and started from there? And it's a question that has resonated with me for a long time because years ago there was a friend of mine that I tried to get into the game, and I explained to him about all of the politics, and I explained to him about all of the market, and I explained to him all these kinds of things, and he looked at me and said, "Yeah, but is it fun to play? And why is it fun?" And I didn't have a good answer for him at the time. And this is a question that has actually stuck in my craw for years. You know, what makes Eve fun? So it's something that resonates with me quite a bit. So I'm glad to hear that that is something that interests you as well. Um,
Yeah, so I think the fun aspect of the game is a bit of a misnomer. I think Eve is a rewarding game where you feel accomplishment for what you get up to. Look, it can definitely be fun when you run certain kinds of missions and do a bit of PvE here and there. But more of that is just a means to an end. Most people PvE purely so they can fund all of their other activities. And unfortunately, it's one of those compromise situations, and players inherently in this game will min-max, as much as they possibly can, because this game is all about efficiency. What is the least amount of work I can do for the most amount of income? And then once that income is achieved, they will do what they see fit, be it buy officer modules or fund their alliance. And I think fun is not really something that can be applied properly to Eve Online, because it's more of the reward of what you get up to. Be it supporting your alliance, building territory, building ships. Some people like the reward of what they do in the game, and the fun is more secondary to them. It's the rewards of the activities that they're after.
Yeah. And well, the question of what is fun and what makes fun and all that stuff, that's a game design wide question. It's just something that I like to muse on. But I appreciate you kind of diving into that for a second with me. But you said that you ran for CSM 14 and admitted that that was more of a joke. I presume that implied in that you didn't run for CSM 15. What has changed now? Like if you ran mostly as a joke before, you weren't really taking the CSM seriously before. If you're running seriously now, what has changed? Why are you taking it seriously now?
Well, as I've accrued more years and more characters in this game, I've come to realize that I don't want to see the fruits of my labor disappear. And most people are happy to just carry on running their anomalies or doing whatever they do to keep their little activity going. But I want the entire activity of the game to carry on going. And sometimes, if you see something, a minor change that could improve the quality of the overall game, a lot of people will just mention it here and there, but they won't really do anything about it. And that's something that I could see being a major pitfall in the longevity of this game, is that a lot of people are full of errors with the game, but they're not really willing to do too much with those. Many people have come across bugs in the game and they just say it's the way the game is. They don't really want to take action on it, and they'll happily complain about it somewhere. So at some point between the 14 and now, it occurred to me that I should at least do what I can to keep the game going. I should do what I can to improve the quality of it, and I should do what I can to help others play it. So that's my position. And look, I'm under no reservations. The name Lucrative Business Opportunity is unfortunately a very eye and suspicion raising name. And I was hoping that the format of my latest CSM candidacy, the graphs, the messages, a little bit of propaganda in there, was enough to coax someone out of this must be a scam character.
Right.
Because unfortunately, Lucrative is quite a serious character in my opinion, on my side. But from someone on the outside looking at the name, it raises all the flags. So I was hoping if they did click on it because it was a funny name and a funny title on the forum post, they could actually see some legitimacy in all the context I've put there.
Right, and there is a lot of legitimacy there, and that's what I was trying to explore because when you run as a joke candidate, that's not just like saying something about CCP. That's also saying something about the CSM, right? Like there has been questions of legitimacy of the CSM before. I'm a strong proponent of the CSM, um, and so I was more curious about whether or not your opinion about what the CSM is has changed at all to make it so that you now want to be on the CSM, whereas before you just kind of wanted to take part in the CSM campaign process.
So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, um, we're all in this together, and we all want to make this game last as long as possible. And my opinion was probably the same a while ago, where you have a CSM candidate, and it was seen as just an ambition for some people. My power block is the biggest, therefore I'm going to get voted on,
Right.
and that is just another tick box in the accomplishments of the game, rather than being a person to improve and develop the game. And obviously, they can't really influence CCP to any massive degree, but hopefully, they can be a conduit for a resonant base of people who see maybe a one change or two changes or a group of changes, and they could push that through the conduit of their CSM, or maybe even other CSMs, maybe even rival CSMs. Because just because you have a CSM from a rival alliance doesn't mean they would be obtuse to the fact that there's a game improving feature that could be added to the game. And this is one of my biggest grievances with the CSM process is that some people will not support a CSM candidate with legitimate goals purely because he is on the other side. And that is a massive pitfall in the election process, is that massive alliances will get their candidate in regardless of what the candidate's actual goals are. And the goals might actually be to the benefit of that alliance only, rather than to the health of the game as a whole.
Right. So rather than be cynical about it, you are trying to be part of the change, or at least be part of the solution to the problem by being a voice outside of that realm, which, as we know, is a very contested. And in this year, there's quite a few really good candidates that are looking for those non-block vote slots. I should say, if you want to talk it that way. So let's start digging into a little bit about who you are as a candidate. The first thing you put up is faction warfare. Um, I do want to jump into like mission running and all that kind of stuff first, but you put faction warfare, you get my attention. So I'm a big fan of faction warfare. First and foremost, what do you believe is the purpose and value of faction warfare in EVE Online?
Well, faction warfare should primarily be about generating content. Be it one group versus another group, in a red versus blue situation.
Right.
But, the underlying aspect of that is also to generate a bit of bonus LP and income from that. But there should be an actual reason to engage in it besides income. And a bit of a I need an enemy to fight scenario. But not an alliance versus an alliance on the null block level, but on a smaller scale, which is what I think the true purpose of faction warfare should be.
Right. So I would say, and this is something I've thought about a lot. Like, we talk about pirates in LowSec, and I thought about what faction warfare pilots are, having been in. I was faction warfare for a while. Really, faction warfare pilots are privateers, right? It's getting PvP and getting paid for it. That's one of the nice things about it. And then the other piece of it is that in a world in which like normally like nullsec you have all freedom, but you have to figure out all your own story, your own goals, your own identity, your own objectives. In high sec, you have you very structured world where you are told exactly what you can do. Faction warfare in low sec is that kind of middle ground where people can choose to forward the objectives of the non-player characters, which makes it a really interesting place for role players and other people that want to choose like an external objective to themselves without necessarily having it be a player-driven objective in the same way of like the Imperium or something like that. So in that sense, I think that's kind of what faction warfare is good for, and I say that because of kind of to highlight what you're talking about in your proposal. So with that in mind, what would you suggest for faction warfare, given the fact that there has been so many candidates right now and so much attention and so much call for an update to faction warfare?
Well, I just think at the moment faction warfare is too much. too much of warp to a beacon, sit there, maybe fight someone, warp off if you don't like what's coming, and there's no real substance to it. Sure, there's been 2 or 3 massive blocks fighting each other over space for one term, and then that's been it. But I think so much more can be added to it. And don't get me started on the grievance issues with the faction warfare system, where you can flip a system deep into enemy territory with, on a quiet time of the day, for instance. And like you say, it's an in between of the absolute freedom of nullsec and the very limited state of what you can do in highsec. But also, you do have the vanilla low-sec in between that. So it's more of a low-sec with a goal, is the way I see faction warfare. And I think, unfortunately, when it comes to faction warfare, eventually someone will win, and they've won the war. And then what do you do from there? A lot of organizations have blossomed, they've dominated one section of faction warfare, and then what? They've won, basically. So there does need to be a bit more content added to it. Maybe some lore injection is in order here and there. But at the end of the day, at some point, we're going to have to exhaust what is possible. But in between that, I think there can be some massive improvements done to the system, purely to engage people, besides warp to beacon, sit there, fight some NPCs if there's any around, and call it a day. And if there's a too big a fleet coming for you, you leave. And I think that's very stale gameplay. That's almost on the level of warping into anomaly in your Gila. And I think that's pretty sad. Maybe if there could be mini missions in each of the sites, something like that would be a vast improvement. And also, a lot of PvEers would like something a bit more than running agent missions. If there could be some actual complex sites to get involved in, maybe even on a fleet scale, on the incursion hacking systems, something like that could just add a bit more spice to it. Because at the moment, it does seem to be dominated by a few stagnant groups, and that's pretty sad, especially as a lot of people would like to engage in PvP outside of pirate activity and lowsec. And like you say, it's almost nullsec sovereignty for a fee for the faction that you choose.
So the thing that I caught out of all of that that I wanted to key in on is the idea of like the grievance or the grief. The I can't remember what you called it, but like getting a territory deep in the level, um, deep in enemy
Oh yeah,
territory.
territory flipping sort of deep into enemy territory is very frustrating, especially in time zone. Unfortunately, this game spans the globe, so there's going to be times of the day where you can't be active, and sometimes there's just nothing you can do. And if someone goes into a deep stronghold system, a group of them, and they run as many sites as possible, they can flip it sometimes, and that is deeply frustrating, as all of your work throughout the normal daytime is just undone. And I think that's a deep drawback of the current system, is that there's no actual war front in the faction warfare, which is what which is what you want to see on a battlefield. There's an actual battleground or battleground systems in the case of faction warfare, and it should be a system like that, and the systems behind the faction warfare systems should be contributing towards the war front in some respect. And that's just an idea I've been playing with. I've talked to a few long-standing faction warfare players, and they've all said that similar things have been said.
That's true.
And I'll admit that there's definitely improvements to be added to my suggestions, but I think something like that is the basis of where we should move.
I mean, it is true that this is a common proposal among faction warfare aficionados. My concern is that like faction warfare is one of those things where smaller groups can come in all the time and make a name for themselves, and so the idea of them like attacking some distant system and taking it that's way out of the way and starting a new war front um, is very very valuable. And then the notion that somebody would just take like a capital system is absolutely absurd. It would take 2 to 3 days nonstop to take a system, and I've yet to have a system or like not to get too cocky about it, but like Fleet has never fallen while we were guarding it. So, but that being said, this is a very popular system. I've suggested like a campaign system where basically certain constellations are given focus for a period of time. Either way, the idea is to concentrate focus into specific areas, focused and shifting areas to make it so that the content kind of undulates to bring back maybe some of what we've lost from cool sieges back in the day, which is when faction warfare was kind of hitting on all cylinders. Um, this isn't your only topic, though, but I wanted to give you one last opportunity to touch on the subject if you wanted to, and we can move on to other things if you want.
No, certainly what you just mentioned, where you have sort of a shifting focus of the different factions and the faction warfare, could something that be added onto the basis? Is that you don't just have to have a war front where it's just the two sides fighting in one contested system, and until one side weakens, that's it. It doesn't progress. You could have a dynamic activity not no, I don't want no. Let me retract that. Dynamic activity multiplier is already hated,
No, no, I
but
get
you
what you're
could have
saying. Like things towards the edge of the war front is easier to take, whereas deep you can still do it, but like maybe there's not as much of a bone. You have to get more VP, more victory points to take a system that's deeper than shallower, for example.
that could definitely be an option where the amount of activity needed behind the war front could be substantially more. It could still be doable, but not as easy as just flipping any random system as it currently is. So, or it could be a system where if you want to take over a system behind the warfront, you could be there, you could be contesting the system. It takes a bit longer than usual, and maybe there's a few extra steps and a few sites you have to hack or something along those lines. But on top of that, it could actually notify the opposing party so that they have to come and reinforce it to clear you out. I think there's these things I would like to think are not too difficult to implement. We already have a notification system. And I'm sure some of the sovereignty mechanics could be yanked out of nullsec sov and somehow injected into the lowsec faction warfare system.
It's
I know that everyone jokes about the POS code, but I'm pretty sure something like that is pretty viable.
it's pretty funny because a lot of people like to say that the Intosis Sov mechanics came from faction warfare originally. So it's like circle back around. But I to that end, when faction warfare received a big change last time, this was back in like 2011, 2012, very different culture in EVE Online. And so part of what we got today is based on things that the players demanded during those changes. Back before, those sites with a single rat in them used to be full of rats, and the button was 40 kilometers away. So you would actually either fight or more likely have a ship that could dodge all of the bad guys and just run the beacon because they didn't stop it. So they changed it from a PvE site to a PvP site. And this was one of the biggest things, right? Like they didn't want PvE to taint their PvP. That's why the rat is just a DPS check and not like a threat in and of itself. That's why the rat doesn't scram. That's why these sites are so simple, is because they didn't want anything that would get in the way of the fact that they just wanted to get together and fight. But that was who was in control of the narrative and the voice at that time. Since then, I've seen a lot of stuff about people who are interested in fighting for their respective factions and a request for more complex sites. When the new AI first came out, people were like, no, don't make combat event sites out of that in faction warfare. It's about PvP, not PvE. But I think over time that is changing. Do you think that, first of all, are you in touch with faction warfare? Do you play faction warfare? Are you in communication with a lot of people in faction warfare? And do you think that the culture has changed enough that they want PvE and PvP to help make their world more immersive? Or do they like the King of the Hill thing and they just want the mechanics like Citadels fixed or something?
Well, I'm definitely not active, well, very active in faction warfare. Definitely not at the moment. I'm in contact with a few people who are pretty active and have been very active. But it's more, this is what I've gleaned from what people have told me, because I haven't done it at least for 2, 3 years now. And purely because it was so stagnant back then also. Um, it's difficult to really pinpoint exactly what we need to do, because like you said about the kiting DPS check rat, it's difficult to say should faction warfare be just a pure PvP generation module for people and they get paid via the factions. I don't think we can really have this viable gameplay in the game anymore, because you do need to attract the PvE people into the same scenario, and it could be a balance between 80% of the content could be some PvP focused, but it needs to be more than just warp to a site, hold the node for enough time, and then leave. It should be on a contesting system of some kind. And look, I'm not going to say that I have all of the solutions to faction warfare, but I think just a few mix ups are definitely in order. And like you say, last time everyone was in a ruckus about it with this one rat that they would have to contest the site with. Sometimes the loudest voices and the majority of the loud voices is sometimes not really the wise route to take with some changes. Maybe learn from them, but I think we can all say that the dominant voices are not sometimes the best things to implement.
Right. So, and I think it's really important, and thank you for exploring this topic with me, because while there are a lot of people who are running for CSM right now who think that faction warfare rebalance is important and who claim to potentially represent faction warfare, I don't know if any of them like is like a pure faction warfare candidate that is faction warfare in the same like way that Hans Jagerblitzen was during the last faction warfare rebalance. And it's also true that like we are I hate to, I don't want to like be too predictive, but it seems that if we're not really close to a faction warfare or like on the cusp of a faction warfare rebalance, that we are probably pretty darn close to it, because the player base is calling for it. The lore is seeming to point to it. CCP seems to be interested in it, but it is probably going to be a maybe even a bigger effort than just like minor tweaking, even compared to the previous faction warfare update. We'll just have to see. But, and here's the key thing, with that being said, even if faction warfare is next year, having a CSM person on the CSM right now, or next year, in this upcoming year, that understands faction warfare, or at least has like finds it important and sees the value in it, is incredibly important. And as I said, there's not that many slots open, and so at this point, we're not going to get our faction warfare candidate in there. And so, Lucrative's business opportunity brings to the table not only a foundation of the problems of faction warfare, but also the knowledge of how to communicate with the people in faction warfare, so he can represent that as well. So I appreciate that. Let's go ahead and dig
Yeah,
deeper into that.
I'll just like to add on to that.
Sure.
That I'm not here as a one platform kind of person. I do see that there are problems throughout many of the mechanics in the game, and I don't want to be just that one candidate who is only for high sec PvP improvement or something like that.
Right.
I
But
wanted to create a base of I'm concerned with a few things. I might not be an expert in all of them. I can see there's a problem, and that I'm willing to engage as much as I can to improve them.
right. So to that end, when it comes to PVE, which you've kind of alluded to a few times, one of the biggest problems that I found is that CCP keeps making better PVE rats, events, and encounters, but the player base rejects them. Like the old institutional knowledge, which continues to be taught to newer players, is that PVE is boring fundamentally, and so a lot of times the new AI and the stuff that involves the new AI is either poorly understood, and or not engaged with much by a lot of the player base, a lot more of the player base than I believe would enjoy it if they gave it a shot or understood it. So CCP really has done their part in the last 2 or 3 years to make PvE better, and it feels like at a certain point, like what good are they getting out of it? If people are just going to ignore it and refuse to acknowledge it, then if all people want to do is rat the same predictable AI, like what do you even do if the only point is PvP and PvE cannot be considered valid gameplay by the public consciousness? Why put more work into it? And I'm circling this one, but and at the same time, mission runners seem to like their consistency, or have in the past. If Ratters like their consistency, there's a need for that player base and that play style as well. So just simply replacing the rats would be very disruptive, if not a huge technical undertaking. How do we solve this problem and make PvE better and make people believe in PvE more?
I'm of the opinion that subtle, not long term, short to medium term changes are in order. You saw with Blackout the way CCP nuked local in Nullsec, and activity just plummeted. People don't like risk. The sheer number of Eve wiki articles is a testament to that. A lot of people will not even attempt to run something until they've read the exact triggers of the rats, the behavior, what to do, what can tank it.
Right.
And I think that's a
Exactly.
big flaw of this game is that we all try to optimize as much as possible. We don't want to risk what we have, even though we might have vast amounts of wealth, because none of us inherently want to lose anything. And it's that adventurous side of most people that's being not decimated, but being suppressed in a large amount of the player base. They want the easy ship that is guaranteed to run the site or to do whatever they want to do, and that's about it. They don't really want too much dynamic about it. One of
Can I tell a quick story about
we
that?
can get
Oh,
to
oh.
it, but further down, I had a few points that address this kind of stagnatism that people prefer, and it's pretty sad in the grand scheme of things.
Uh, I'm not sure if it's there or later, but we'll keep on going
No, 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 sure, sure.
with your
Go at the
thing. But
pace you
no, I
see
do.
fit.
I want to tell a quick story to really drive that home, because what you just described, I observed it in myself in a way that was very striking. Right. So these events come out every so many weeks, and uh, they all have slightly different mechanics, and I found myself even like not wanting to go and run them until somebody came out with a build that would do it, even though I generally know the power levels, and I'm like, and even going like looking it up in hobo leaks or something like that in order to figure out the damage type of the rats in order to try to suss it out outside of game. And then I realized, like, dude, I could just grab like a Corvette, go into the room, hit show info, get killed by it, get some idea what's inside of there, do some actual reconnaissance, and build up a strategy. And how much more fun would that be? And that I'm cheating myself every single time I get the answer from somebody else. Like in how many other video games would that be considered like, don't look up any wiki. Like, go experience it for yourself. We don't teach each other that. And I think that's important.
I have fallen far from exactly what you've described in games outside of EVE Online, where a game has been out for a few months. Usually I wait until the bugs are sorted out. But then you would go and look up the wiki. You would see, okay, what skills, depending on the game, what should I pursue as the most effective build? And I had to really take myself out of that mindset because then that's where the fun aspect goes. You are just following an optimized build that somebody else has put up there. You might as well be playing a spreadsheet simulator at that stage because you've extracted the dynamic risk that you're putting yourself at. And like you say, with these events, I also used to fall foul of that all the time where I would wait a few days. Generally speaking, on Reddit, there would be a post. Here are the triggers. This Gila fit is perfect. This is what you need to do. And that's pretty sad the way a lot of people will just wait until somebody else has sussed it out. They put an optimized fit, and then there's no fun to that. So I think a dynamic aspect of difficulty does need to be added to some aspects of this game, a bit of fluidity that makes it a bit too unpredictable for a generic build. That's why I love the diamond rats so much, because those things get the heart rate pumping as soon as you see them and within D-scan range.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the diamond rats tend to be a bit too, should we say, beefy for the average person. So I've
That's
always
true.
been of the opinion that smaller fleets of them, which are a bit more manageable, but still risky enough for the single player to engage with.
Well, arguably, that's exactly what Rasnaborg are. And not the like the new, like the modern one is a little bit tougher, the packs, but like even back in chapter 1 and chapter 2, or chapter 2, when we had those Rasnaborg packs that would roam around, 4 or 5, you know, uh, frigates and destroyers that you could hunt down with D-scan. Um, like they have been experimenting with this kind of dynamic content. Sometimes it's acceptable, sometimes people don't like it. I actually think that CCP likes it a lot more than the player base do. Even things like the Triglavians killing players on gates and stuff. If you think about it, the reason why that's valuable is because um, the techniques that you would use to defend yourself against Triglavians trying to kill you is exactly the same techniques as you would use to defend yourself against players trying to kill you. And therefore, if you if you get killed by the Triglavians, uh, because it's an NPC that does it to you, hopefully the player more calculates it as something that can be managed, can be beaten. If it's a player, they might think that they got cheesed out of something. But if an NPC kills you, you kind of deep down you know that like you must have done something wrong, because not everybody's dying to these things. And so hopefully it encourages the person to look into how to do it, which ends up teaching them pieces of the game, which is what this is all about. And what I want to get back to you about, which is that part of the problem that I think is happening is EVE is not a very learnable game. Like, you can't just play the game and learn the game. You're supposed to go outside of the game. Like, we say, oh, it's best to be taught by players. But part of the reason why is because so little is explained, and so poorly in not just the tutorial, but in the UI and all over the place. We don't expect to learn how to do something in Eve by playing Eve. And therefore, our instinct is to go to a wiki, to ask a person, to check Reddit. How do we fix this on a fundamental level to make it so that Eve is a learnable game?
Yeah, and this is well, just to comment on your Triglavian rats and Hisek. I love those things. Part of Lucrative's trick is that he's also a hauling character, and seeing those things on the gates really got the heart pumping. And I love those kind of little aspects when suddenly 30 catalysts descend on you, except this time as Triglavian rats, and introducing very risk-adverse players to a bit of risk. I think is something definitely in order in all sectors of space, but maybe Hisek in particular, where you can't just undock your Hulk, warp to an asteroid belt, press F1, walk away, and knowing that you might get ganked by a group of catalysts every now and then. But that dynamic risk, because unfortunately many people in this game play it AFK. They undock their raw call, they warp to their moon belt, they mine, they walk away. But worst of all, people do that in HiSec where the reward is so little. But anyway, yeah, moving back to your comment about what can we do to introduce people back to more risk. I think CCP's dipping their toe in the waters of what players will tolerate is a good start, where you create a few spicy additions to test the player base, get them used to a few aspects of their new gameplay, and basically move it from there. Because new players will tolerate a lot of abuse in a certain aspect. And I think CCP's fault to fault CCP on a few of many things. Because I don't want to be a person who's just on the CSM to be their friend. Sometimes harsh words need to be said to improve it for everyone. But small iterative changes I think would go much further than just one massive update to really piss everyone off in the player base. Um, Blackout was, a testament to that, where suddenly all of nullsec is blackout, and then everyone logs off because they don't want to play a gameplay like that. They've gone from all the intel they can imagine to no intel, and that is a massive shock to the system. It could have been handled in many far better ways, but I think slow iterative gameplay changes is the way forward for this game because there's a lot of very stagnant people who are in their ways, and if you knock over their little Eve wiki on how to play the entire game, that's it. They've had enough. They'll log off. You've seen the posts on Reddit where someone will say, "Oh, CCP's changes, they've ruined my life, and I'm gone." And I think that person could have been enticed to carry on playing if only the change had been implemented a bit more subtly, with a bit more nuance. And I think that's the way forward.
I think that it may not even be the subtlety of the change, but how well communicated it is. It's fine to let the resident board kill a person, but it'd be even better if the system detected that this happened and gave them some sort of breadcrumb towards the light. They made it so that now GMs are more likely to like message you if you've been ganked or killed within the first like 30 days of playing the game to help you like grief counseling or whatever, which kind of speaks to what they feel is a way out of this. But it would just be so much better if the system detected what was wrong and told you better, in the same way of like the good example of this is the fitting window. When you're now blown out in CPU and power grid, it says in the top left corner what's going on. Whereas before it was just like, and nothing works and you don't know why. So, but I want to shift over to another piece because you have a long list of really interesting changes and recommendations that, while I don't know necessarily whether or not they're like you're going to be able to champion them and get them through to CCP, they do a good job of showing where your priorities are and what kind of things you're going to advocate for and speak and warn against. But I do want to come back to the Edencom problem, right? So one of the things that I think that has been happening is when Poshfin ended, when Chapter 3 ended, first of all, Invasions Chapter 1 and 2 was a 2-year cycle. And so for 2 years, we were working towards something, and we knew we were working towards something. And then it ended, and everybody kind of expected like the next thing to happen. But the problem is that like the invasion cycle was the abnormality, and now we're kind of back to normal. But at the same time, because we moved on, And also because rumor has it, Edencom wasn't necessarily a main consideration as like something that the player base would rally behind. The Edencom players have felt pretty left out, and these are some of the largest role players and active participants in the Eve story since the beginning of Eve. Right? These are the guys that you definitely don't want to abandon your game. These are the people that like are are the lifeblood of getting people interested in looking at things deeper. And CCP seems to be alienating and infuriating them. And now have turned around and done kind of the same thing to the Kybernauts by taking what they felt was their reward away. This is a mess. We want conflict. We want to be able to fight for things. We want to be able to fight on behalf of big changes and with empires and stuff like that. But like follow up is important. And at the same time, Edencom is so hurt at this point that they don't even want anything to do with it. If you ask them, they say they don't want it fixed. They want it gone, and they want something else. They want something better because this is already messed up. I don't know if that's necessarily true. That's just like the sound of a very hurt person, in my opinion. But like, if you're saying that you want to be on the CSM and you want to, in particular, step into this particular problem, wade into it, my friend. What do we do about the Edencom problem?
Yeah, it's very, very sad what's happened to the Edencom players. Just as you said, they had this 2-year hiatus of conflict and fight over systems and the beautiful role playing that came along with it. And then here we are. They've got no reason to really exist. Sure, they can go and fight some Triglavians and Povchin as their role playing alliance that they are. But what else? There's no law to carry on fighting. It's just they would be Edencom versus the Triglavians. Whereas the Strybog guys, they have their own sector of space now. Their standings mean something for all the fights they've done. They've been rewarded quite handsomely for it, which they should have. But Edencom is now sitting here with no real reason to persist. So maybe we could somehow introduce, I think as I mentioned, a similar faction warfare system could be introduced in PovGen space. But I think PovGen space itself is highly deficient in the way it's so hostile to a new non-standing player that only embedded players who've been part of the entire conflict for those 2 years can actually do anything. You
Well,
can't put down new structures, and most people can't use any of the services in NPC stations.
but you can use the gates now, so you can go in. The point is to have almost like a home field advantage. It is very similar to the faction warfare thing, where there's station lockout mechanics, right? So people can come in and do stuff, but if you're not a resident, you're right. You don't get to have all of the cool services and refits and industry and all that stuff. But the gates got open. Do you think that that's not sufficient?
It's a step. It's a step in the right direction. But I look. I appreciate if we want to become from a 100% law standpoint. Nobody who isn't on the Triglavian side should be allowed to dock in these stations. But we live in a game which has to entice players to participate, and I think we have to compromise at some point. And I think the compromise is that instead of locking people out of services, they should maybe just pay a penalty for it. The services could cost double than usual. At least they have a starting point to embed themselves in Triglavian space and progress. But at the moment, you can't put down a new structure, and the few structures that do exist are locked off to everyone. And it's a very difficult position to be in as someone who wants to start doing things in Triglavian space.
To be
But like I say,
absolutely clear,
you can't be a purist in this aspect. We do need to have a bit of compromise.
you don't get locked out of the stations until you actually go somewhat negative to the Triglavians. So if you just are totally neutral and run in there, you should be able to dock. You're right, you can't unlock services, but again, there, with knowledge of wormholes and all that stuff, people from the outside can come in relatively easily, especially with filaments. Um, so you don't feel like there's a need for a home field advantage for those who live there and choose to live in a null sec that they cannot control and cannot stop people from going into. What's to
There
stop
should
people from
definitely
just
be
not
a.
come out?
Oh, of course. Look, certainly the Triglav people should have some reward, and they have been given their reward. But I do think there's an element of we need to have a reasonable mechanic to allow newer players who are negative standing to at least have a way of of building a foundation in the space. And I just think a few little changes, like the standings iterations, would be ideal for that. Unless we wanted to be 100% wormhole space without stations, I think it's a bit counterproductive for newer players. And yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it is very restrictive to the majority of people who are not embedded in the system already.
I will say that
Don't the Strabog guys want something to fight over? We could always have a station or two which Edencom has somehow reclaimed as a law aspect. There's many changes that could be suggested. I just think that that's a foundation to progress from, where players still have an ability to do something in the system, while docked with services.
this discussion just gave me an idea, which is that we could tie different station levels based on where they are. So border system, because it used to be that the border system gates were easier to get through than internal, which are easier to get through than home. Right now, only home are locked still. Um, but that makes it so that there's not really that much of a difference between border and internal anymore, which is kind of unfortunate. So it'd be interesting if like border system stations were more open, whereas home system stations, first of all, exist. We need to have at least one station in every single one of the home systems. Otherwise, this really seems to fall apart quickly. Um, but then have that be like,
That's a spectacular change. I hadn't actually thought of that.
yeah,
And like you say, as you progress further into more embedded, more fortified systems, of course you would expect there to be a stronger resistance and a stronger resentment for non-aligned players. So even that is a good change. You could have the border systems have reasonable, maybe not even standing lock systems. They could just have open stations for someone to base out of. And if they want to progress further in with the rewards that comes with it, then they need to do something about it. So even that change is a vast improvement over the current 100% lockdown station services,
right, exactly. So,
especially as how much of a grind it is to get the standings.
right. And it is also true that you can now get positive with both by being in Poshvin. So it isn't terribly difficult to go in and live in there, but there is a lot of complexity and a lot more attention that needs to be brought on that. So again, I appreciate you digging into these issues. You're not the ones. You're not the one that's choosing the issues that I'm digging into, and I'm sure they're probably not the ones that you would probably highlight first and foremost. But I think that that's good because as a CSM person, you don't get to pick the major priorities. You just get to pick what you say in contribution to these different things. So I think that that was a really good exploration of lucrative business opportunity as a opportunity on the CSM. You have this is about your 10-minute warning. You more than some others probably need that. So why don't you take control and kind of highlight some things that you really feel are important?
Ah, yes, yeah. No, let me quickly bring up my thing because I'm still a bit on the spot. But yeah, apart from look, there's many, like I said right in the beginning of this interview, there's a lot of small changes that I could suggest to be implemented to improve the health of the game. Something that I, for some reason, have particular interest in, and I know a lot of other people have particular interest in, is a lot of the merchandise from this game. On one of my other characters, as one of other characters, I did submit content for the poster contest, and I won one of the prizes. And my poster was selected as as the prize itself. And CCP said we will make these posters available for public purchase. And I think that's spectacular. That something like that, which could really for instance, you buy one of these merch posters, you put it up on your wall. A friend comes around, they see it, they see the quality of work that went into it, they ask a few questions. How can we make this game attractive to outside people? And I think merch, not only does merch benefit the person, because we all love our own merch, but little things like that are certainly a perfect route to introducing new people to this, to show them the dedication that the player base has for certain contributing factors. I have my alliance poster on the wall. I have a succubus, plushie potentially if CCP could make it available. And I think merch is heavily underutilized. I was glad that they got that third-party company to start 3D printing things. But this is something that CCP could make so much revenue for. And we all need to stop pretending that CCP isn't a business. They are a business. They need to make money. They need to keep players. They need to gain players. And as a business, they need to pursue these interests. And merch, I think, is something heavily underutilized, which the player base is very open to. I would be open to it. I would love to buy a succubus like spiky plushie and put it on my mantle frame with other toys I've got from other games and things like that. I think, just to highlight that in particular, because I think that is something that is one of the most ridiculously small things that people would 100% be behind merch. So something like that, I think, is just, I don't understand why that's not really implemented. Merch
Not
is something everyone loves, and if they don't like it, they just don't buy it.
not
Sure, there's a
just
couple of T-shirts and things,
not
but
just
yeah, it's not to rail too much, but I'm very disappointed in the lack of merch available from CCP themselves. You can go onto eBay and buy some random merch that other people created, but officially licensed high quality stuff people would just love, including myself. I make no money out of it. This is something CCP could make money out of it, and they're not exploiting it.
yeah. I'm showing off their merch store right now, which is
Yeah,
cool.
it's woefully stocked. Look, there's some
Yeah,
few memey things like the coif shirt and
yeah,
stuff, but
yeah. So its
it's
selection is
just
low, and here's the thing.
the
Uh,
quality's not very
show
high either.
show of hands in chat who have never heard of the merch store, right? Like, even here's the problem. Like, we often say, well, part of the problem is that there's not very much of a demand for these merch, so people don't put, it's like even if they put in these T-shirts, they're gonna have problems. And there was actually licensing issues. There's several years where there wasn't a merch store. Look at all these hands coming up. Yeah, I might as well be doing a giveaway with how many people are chatting right now. And that's the thing is it's like you got to start somewhere. We got to start showing off the merch stores, the merch stuff that we have, and then build up on that. So yeah, the problem, like, it blows my mind because it's like they hide the fact that they sell this stuff, and then we sit around and go, I don't know why this stuff doesn't sell. So
Yeah, not
hopefully,
like you say. Not only do they hide it, but it is heavily unexploited. The what is there? There's like 15 items,
mhm.
and they're fairly mediocre items at that. And many of these items could be made by third parties under some typical licensing agreement. They could even get a third party store to make it all.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean, the
and
players would jump at the opportunity to make these things. I did. I made one of the posters in the poster contest. I made a few. Obviously, the one won. It's I'm just so disappointed in CCP for not exploiting that route everybody would love. They could get their
yeah,
revenue, and we could get our toys and bits and pieces.
right. That said,
But
like
obviously, that is secondary to the game. But I just think that is the one of the most silly things that hasn't been properly applied to this game as a whole yet.
yeah, and it is true that they've had some like deals where like if you buy something on the store you get a skin in game, but again, these are usually pretty short lived, tied in with other things too, and stay kind of out of the attention. So like maybe if I mention it on a show or something like that, then people know about it, but a lot of people really didn't. And the 3D printed models are really cool, uh, and especially like merch usually is bought and sold for Eve at conventions. Honestly, they like bring it to the convention and sell it there, so that way they don't have to deal with all of the store issues that you normally have with like an online market internationally. Um, but without
I'm
any
sorry. I
events,
just I just I just can't really buy those kind of excuses from CCP. The internet platforms now form global networks. They could just make 500 whatever it is for next to nothing, because merch, generally speaking, is very cheap to produce. Ship it to Amazon. Amazon could stock it for them. They take their slice. But if CCP isn't doing anything, they're not making anything. But more importantly, the player base love these kind of things. I just want to cement that in.
right?
People love these silly merch things, and CCP is just not even providing that basic aspect of the game to them.
Yeah, and I know that for a while there's an issue with like partnerships, like basically who's going to manage their merchandising and all that stuff. And I don't know how that's advanced. And as I was saying, like especially with no events happening last year and events in question this year, like it is time I think to bolster that a little bit. But again, my concern is that they're not doing that because they think that people aren't actually going to buy the merch, but people aren't buying the merch because they don't know about it. So that's going to be a really difficult problem to solve. A lot of these problems I find that I discussed at the CSM really come down to um, how do we teach or help the player base understand how things are, as well as help CCP understand what needs to happen. And I think that that is an important role of the CSM that people don't really talk about. And I will say one thing is that you've been incredibly well spoken this entire time. You got actual comments about it in our chat. So if nothing else, that shows that you can sit here and discuss all of these different topics, all of this different stuff that is incredibly valuable as we enter into this stuff or into this new age of EVE Online. I think that you have a broad array of topics that you can speak incredibly intelligently on, and it seems like an array of resources that you draw upon to collect that information. But anything else you wanted to point out?
Look, your words are too kind. I'm actually fairly nervous right now. I'm looking at the heart rate monitor, so it's good to hear that at least I'm coming through coherently. But sorry, just to hammer home on the whole merchant business, they could make limited runs of anything at next to no cost. There's no excuse for not at least experimenting. But yeah, anyway, so anyone can go and read my manifesto page, and I've covered a lot of little things, a lot of little gameplay changes, because we all can't be big gameplay change kind of people. But some of the little things could bring so much of a high quality future to this game, from merch to skins to little gameplay changes. And that's the kind of person I want to be running as. I don't have solutions to all the problems in Eve, but I have a few suggestions for some of the ones that I know are a problem. And that's the kind of person that I'm trying to run as. Not as someone who's going to fix this game. I have all the solutions, and if only people would listen to me, and if only CCP would listen to me, I'm going to fix everything. I'm not that person, and I hope people don't think I'm that person. I have a few changes. I'd like to see some changes implemented. I'd be open to feedback from people, just as your suggestion about the progressive standings implementation of the PovGen area. These are things that I'm open to. What I have come up with so far is just some personal suggestions that I've come up with and a few inputs here and there. But I want to be the person who someone could send something to me. I would weigh it up, I would discuss it with a few other people, then I'd say, no, that is valid, that would improve the game, it would improve the life of the game, or even provide a bit of relief from a griefing system that currently all of us hate. Something like that kind of a platform. So yeah, just to reinforce, I don't have solutions to every problem in this game, but I do have some suggestions for a few things.
You have some opportunities, yes.
Of course, of course. Potentially lucrative business opportunities, you could say.
I mean, you are what you say on the tin, it would appear. A couple of quick questions that I wanted to get into before I headed out. Shoot, what was the one before? Well,
Fire away.
Commander Cottonfluff wants to ask Snickers or Mars bars. Oh,
Ooh, Mars bars. Mars bars are very popular in Africa, well, the part of Africa I grew up in. So I'm going to say Mars bars,
and
and I do like them.
one of the things that you mentioned was the low set gate to stain.
That is something that I heavily campaigned as a meme front outside of the CSM, but I always thought that that would be a worthwhile change. And if you've ever perused Reddit and you've seen sort of one of the decent posts here and there, a lot of the Steingate ones were by my hand on other characters. I love the propaganda around the whole Steingate thing, and
Uh,
Stain Guy better liquidate his character as he promised, just to add.
so just be clear, you're not saying that you are stain guy.
Oh no, no,
Yeah,
definitely
and
not.
I was
Like
I was pretty
I can neither confirm nor deny these accusations. But
well.
between you and me, I'm not the Stain Guy.
So I this brings to mind the response that he gave to me because I was pushing for Stain Guy to put his name on the gate, and he actually responded to me on Reddit and he said that he wasn't going to do that for various reasons, mostly because he doesn't want his name associated with a mining event, which I
Oh,
thought was really funny.
that's a good
But
point. That's a good point.
but his top answer was that he didn't want to do it because it was for the Amar. Shots
Oh,
fired. Do you regret supporting Stain Guy?
I don't know. Hey, one of the things I want to see in the merch store is Empress Jamal body pillow. So I don't think I can align myself with his nefarious ways from now on.
Well, here I am just picking fights at this point, but you have been a great candidate. Thanks for working with me. There were some technical issues that thankfully the YouTube audience don't get to experience, but thank you for hanging through it all and making this work on this morning. and thank you to the chat for hanging in with that too. I'm really glad that I checked out your CSM stream, because I will admit that I hadn't gotten a chance to get in touch with you by that point. But as soon as I saw your CSM stream, I was like, oh man, I got to take this guy seriously. I got to sit down and chat with him. So glad I did, and so glad that you turned around and were able to make this opportunity available so soon.
Yeah, and thank you, my friend. Look, this is not something I would never have thought of myself going onto a stream and taking questions, giving vague answers, and giving some solutions here and there. So it's an experience for myself, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Eve is a wild game, and we never can predict what will come from it, and that's the whole point, I think. All right, well,
Oh yes, the guys at work. I've tried explaining what Eve is to them, and they just can't comprehend what I get involved in, and that's the meme of the game. Let's say.
I'm very poor at recruiting people into Eve from the outside world, but I do wish you the best of luck. I think that you have a very strong candidacy, and there's very good reason to vote you in. Very good reason to have you on the CSM. And either way, I think that you should continue to be involved in the community. And sure, you were a little bit nervous, but I think you did a great job. And I'd love to have you on our show sometime if there's ever anything that is going on in the Eve universe that you feel you need to come and help explain to people.
Oh, thank you very much for the offer. No, definitely. If look, just to reinforce, we all want this game to carry on, and if I can do my little part here and there, I'll do it. So, but thank you very much for the offer. If I come up with any radical suggestions, I'll give you a poke. And you never know, we might have an interview here and there later on, or maybe an interview as an actual CSM candidate if we get to that.
Absolutely, that's an actual CSM member. Well, that would be very cool. I'd love it, and I'd love to have you on either way. But until then, 07, my friend.
Okay. Thanks very much again. Enjoy your day.